I want to welcome all of you and really welcome you to the first event of the BUcity Collab Week of events. Here at BUcity, we thought of creating a collab week where we could really take a break from our regular learning. And really, this week is for us to learn, connect, and discover. And I hope that with every event, including this one, you guys get to do just that. So, the first event of the series that we are hosting this evening is with BU Sustainability and the 75-minute panel discussion, which is named Planning Tools to Support Streets for Everyone, and I mean everyone, will be moderated by Erica Mattison. Say hello, Erica. And she is the Assistant Director of Communications at Boston University Sustainability. The panel from whom you will hear tonight consists of a diverse group of eminent and really committed stakeholders. And we couldn't be happier and more privileged to have them join us this evening on this very, very important discussion. So we have Jimmy Pereira, who is the Community Transportation Planner, Old Colony Planning Council. We have Annabelle Rondon from Great Neighborhoods. She is also the Program Director of Livable Streets. We have Marion De Cayet. I'm sorry, I'm going to murder that name. She is the Director of Inclusive Public Trust from the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We have Elijah Romulus, Assistant Town Planner of the town of Bridgewater. And last but not the least, Nigel Jacobs, who is the co-chair, co-founder of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. We are very, very excited to have you all. And really, if we were in a physical space this evening at this time, this would really be a time for a resounding applause as we welcome all of you to the stage. So with that said, I will give the stage to Erica. Erica, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. Thanks so much for having us this evening, everyone. My name is Erica Mattison, and as Madhu mentioned, I work at Boston University Sustainability, where I lead communications. In addition, in my civic life, I serve as the president of the board of MassBike, which is the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition. So transportation is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm excited to facilitate this evening's dialogue. We're grateful to our panelists for taking the time to share their expertise with us. I'd like to also recognize that we have a tremendous amount of experience among our attendees. Collectively, several hundred years of experience working on transportation projects. I can only imagine how many projects and meetings this group of 65 plus people has experienced. So we welcome you all and are excited to be in community with you this evening. After I introduce the panelists, I'll be kicking things off with a series of questions that we have developed together. And during the event, we encourage attendees to use the chat to share information, comments, and questions. BU student Julia Mintz will be monitoring the chat for questions, and she will select questions to ask toward the end of the program, topics that we may not have covered earlier on. I'll now tell you a little bit about each of our panelists, and then we will dive into our dialogue. So Annabelle Rondon is the Great Neighborhoods Network Director at Livable Streets, where she leads a platform that disseminates resources and tools to grasstops and grassroots groups as a means to create more livable, affordable communities that are culturally and economically vibrant in Massachusetts. She also coordinates the Planners of Color Network, a group of 60 plus professionals of color from the planning, design, and community development fields. Elijah Romulus is an urban planner and Tufts UEP alum who has worked in the city of Chelsea and currently the town of Bridgewater. Elijah has mostly worked in land use and energy planning. He has a passion for advocacy, channeling it through his volunteer work at his church and being an advisory board member for Tufts UEP Department and Clean Water Action's Massachusetts chapter. Jimmy Pereira is the community transportation planner at Old Colony Planning Council, where he has worked since 2014. He focuses on assisting communities with identifying bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, public outreach, environmental justice, racial equity, community planning, and economic development. Previously, Jimmy served as the Healthy Design Coordinator for the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition, MassBike, and he now serves as a MassBike board member, which is how we know each other. So great to have Jimmy with us tonight. In addition, he is an engaged community member who advocates for more community inclusion regarding decisions that impact the residents of the Old Colony region. He's very active in his community of Brockton. Marion De Cayet is an international transportation expert and the first director of inclusive public transit for the Institute of Human-Centered Design in Boston. During her 15 plus years in the transit industry in France, Australia, and the US, her focus has been on improving customer experience using a customer-centric approach and inclusive design principles. And lastly, we have Nigel Jacob, the co-founder of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, a civic innovation incubator and R&D lab within Boston City Hall. Nigel's work is about making urban life better via innovative, people-oriented applications of technology and design. Prior to joining the City of Boston in 2006, Nigel worked in a series of technology startups in the Boston area. So we have a phenomenal panel this evening. So without further ado, we're going to dive into a dialogue based around some really important topics. So here we go. First of all, I'm going to ask the panelists to share a short description of the work that you do and tell about what drew you to this work. And we're going to start with Jimmy on this one.
Great. Thanks again for the opportunity. So kind of work that I do, I always kind of refer to as, when people ask me, what is it that you do? What's regional planning? I kind of just refer to SimCity. So growing up, that was always an interesting game. And then growing up in my community and wondering, why is this vacant lot downtrodden? Why isn't there a playground in the neighborhood? Why is there cracks in the road? These all kind of made me wonder, how did this occur and how do you kind of fix it? So when I went to Westfield State and came upon the geography and regional planning program, I gravitated to it, learned more about it, and then also accompanied it with the multicultural education department, where I focused on ethnic and gender studies. All of it kind of interlinked, and that's when I realized that planning is an interdisciplinary field. From there, I just continued to work with the communities that I grew up in. Springfield, spent 10 years there. Finally got the opportunity to work at the regional planning agency at Old Colony Planning Council, which is smack dab in the middle of Brockton. So really, what really pulled me is being able to find out how to help my community and then go out there and actually execute and try to bring those changes about.
Thank you, Jimmy. Who would like to go next? Just dive right in.
Nope. Good.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Me? Yeah, so I started doing this work. So I'm originally a computer scientist. I guess I still am a computer scientist. But when I was leaving grad school, I was really looking for a mission for my work. I'd been working in high tech for many years. And when I came to work at the City of Boston as a fellow under Mayor Menino at the time, actually, what I began to see was one of the things standing in front or standing between government and doing more creative or innovative things was really this inability to take risk and myself and a few other people at the time, we began to think about that, and we began to develop an approach to thinking about how can we take risks in local government by kind of constraining things and doing these experiments to try out experimental ideas in a whole variety of different ideas, in a whole variety of different contexts. And so when Mayor Mino stepped down, Mayor Walsh, he had never heard of us, and he asked us to stay around. And so we've been doing this work over a couple of different mayors, and the mission has stayed the same. It is really to try to change the way the culture of local government works, so as to enable it to take on risk with an eye towards innovating towards the public good.
Great, thank you, Nigel. Annabelle, would you like to go next?
Sure. So full disclosure, I'm not a planner, but I have been very well connected to the field. I actually landed in this field by mistake, which is community development. And I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. And when I came here about 18 years ago, I landed as part of learning the language. I landed at a nonprofit, and that nonprofit adopted me as a as a new employee, and I started specifically working in the business community, like surveying community business, Latino community businesses specifically, and I loved it. I fell in love with the field right away in terms of like finding out like, specifically the need of the community. And over the years, I have been some sort of in the space of how do we build places and build great neighborhood, which is very interesting. It's like the new title that I have at this new role that I have at Livable Streets. Great neighborhood is not about like one component. It's about having like quality of life, housing, transportation, amenities, and it's welcoming also to everyone and anyone, right? So it's also, I feel like the work that I'm doing right now is more like transforming the way people work together, and specifically how do we uplift those voices of people, specifically people in leadership positions that and people of color that are really interested in like transforming the space and thinking about solutions. And I'm very excited for the work that I'm doing right now, which is specifically interconnecting housing and transportation and climate. So that's how I will summarize it in a very short time frame. Like
Thank you.
my
No,
long
you
18
did a great
years of
job.
experience.
It's a lot to pack into a minute, I know. Elijah, will you share next?
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you for having me. As a planner in both Chelsea and currently Bridgewater, my main function has been as a professional staff to the respective planning boards. Really, it's land use development would probably be the best description. And I've also managed different energy projects and policy proposals. So what drew me into this work? I got an undergraduate degree in engineering from Rochester Institute of Technology. And I went into the work, I was in the manufacturing field, just didn't really feel like I was using all of, all of my talent or passion. At the same time, I started organizing in my hometown of Brockton in different nonprofits. And, as I was doing that kind of community service work, I wanted to find something that could combine my engineering experience as well as my, activism, passion. And I felt that, city planning that in the public service would be one way where I could channel that. And so I went to graduate school for it. And then ultimately that's led me to being an urban planner, a assistant town planner in Bridgewater.
Great, thanks for being here, Elijah. And over to you, Marion.
Hi everyone, and thank you for having me here. So I'll I need to first excuse for my French accents. My daughter have a better Bostonian accent than me, so so she'll be the next generation. So I worked for IHCD, the Institute for Human-Centered Design, and we advise on accessibility and inclusive design for public transit projects. So regardless of the COVID crisis, we know that people live longer, survive more with higher expectation, and so we need to design a better environment. And so that's what we do at IHCD. We go beyond the strict compliance with inclusive design. So we base upon what is strictly needed to enable the city to function for a wider audience. So that's also what is the major draw to me in my work. First, I love transportation. I love connect people with each other. I love the physical connection this time. Now we are connecting only remotely, but I love this about transportation. I love this about public transportation. I love the civil servant part of this service. It needs to be a public service. I love the fact that through transportation, you're able to get out of, so discover new things, but also to come back from. So that's what I love about transportation, and what I also love about accessibility is that everybody is included in this, and we give chances for people to get and discover new things. So this is what is bringing me passion in my work every day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, and no apologies necessary. Many of us strive to have such a good French accent. Those of us who took French for a few years in school anyway. Speaking of accessibility, I'd like to give a shout out to a colleague who is in the room with us tonight, Chris Robinson from one of the BU offices. It's the Disability and Access Services, who is a wonderful facilitator, community builder, teacher, service provider, and just a wonderful member of the BU community. And also mention, that we have many organizations represented here this evening through the list of 70 plus people who've now joined us, everyone from Boston Cyclist Union board members to the executive director of Mass Bike, Galen Mook, who is a BU alum and institution in the local cycling community. We have people from Chile. We have people from many different communities in Massachusetts. People who are active with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. The list goes on. So we're really delighted to have such a breadth and depth of experience and passion here tonight. So now that you've met all the panelists, we're going to kind of talk about some of the problems and the challenges and the issues, and then we're going to talk about some solutions and examples of where there's some really terrific work going on. So let's start by talking about some common mistakes that are made. So Annabelle, if you could start us off, tell us about one of the most common mistakes you see made that prevents planning processes from being inclusive.
Sure. I want to think of this question more like in two buckets. So I will say like before COVID and after COVID, right? Because I think there's challenges and mistakes on both ends. And again, full disclosure, I'm not a planner, but I think it also wearing that hat of non-planner has helped me also be an outsider and observe things from the outside. But I did a little bit of planning in New York City when I was there for my graduate program. And one of the things that when I came on board to this organization to do a planning process in the South Bronx, like one of the things that they were really aware was that, well, first of all, this community was very afraid of gentrification. As you know, New York, the core areas, New York City is being facing a lot of prices in their, their housing. And they were really, I feel this organization was really intentional. We were, this is like Local Initiative Support Corporation, was hired by the housing authority, NACHA, in New York, and in the city, in the city to run this planning process. And there was like a lot of thinking to make sure that we were inclusive in the process. And one of the things that we implemented that the team felt that have done so many planning processes throughout the city that was lacking was like, how do we, obviously planning is such an intense process, like meetings and thinking and synthesizing information. How do we, first of all, considering like all the stress around displacement, how do we make sure that people feel included in this process? And the way that we came up with a strategy, we need to bring planning to people, specifically those people that are working two jobs, that don't have time to come to meetings. So we came up with this concept of like coffee hour. So essentially we will bring a coffee to the lobby of all the public housing in near in the South Bronx to listen to people, but also translate into different languages the questions that we had about that catchment area that we were targeting. So I think the common mistake is more like, how do you translate this work? Because there's a lot, it's very heavy in a lot of language, specifically around development and housing. How do we translate the language, right? Like our lingo to the community, and also how do we come to the community? How do we work if we should be meeting people where they are, specifically those people that usually don't come to meetings, right? Because we usually tend to hear from the same people, right? Like people who are more involved or probably have time, that are retired, right? Like how do we also think about the breakdown of your target community members, right? Like youth, seniors, and young people who are working again two jobs. So I think again that's lacking. Like how do we bring in that community engagement outreach? How do we reach more people? So I will say that's one of them. And I think now post COVID, um, there's a new era around technology. We are doing some of this planning processes. I know some communities in the region that are doing that. How do we keep this some sort of new technology? Again, like it seems like we're gonna attract more people by like, again, we have the assumption because we are connecting from home, it's easier to connect into meetings and public meeting. And I think there was like a study that came out that that's not necessarily true. So those people, those like challenge community that are dealing with technology aspects and all that, like we need to think, about that group of people that usually we don't tap into. So I will say that was the theme throughout the whole, like before COVID and post COVID, like how do we tap into the community that usually don't come to the table?
Thank you for queuing that up so well, Annabelle. You have a lot of experience trying to get turnout and reach people for so many different policy initiatives and planning processes. So that's really great insight. And along those lines, I've had conversations with Madhu from City Planning and Urban Affairs about this topic, as well as with Jimmy Pereira. This is, central to his work. So, Jimmy, if it's okay, I'll kick it over to you and ask you to add your thoughts about sort of common mistakes, maybe missed opportunities, and if you've seen it handled well as well, feel free to mention that. But we will get more into that in the next question.
I think it definitely backpacking on what Annabelle said. There's a lot of missed opportunities, assuming that whether it be the low income community or the English second language community has access to or are able to participate in, so say, in like a public planning workshop, or even a equity training opportunity as well. So what I've seen is that what even in our own agency is that we try to cast the net and then try to drag it back in and see what we have. But you can also, and I can compare it to a previous work that we've done where we are more of we're taking more of a boots on the ground approach, approaching people, conducting the survey or doing the survey for them. But how do we do that in a post-COVID or even currently now in a COVID or a pandemic? So we're going through that now. We're still trying to kind of figure that out also. And some of the things that I've seen or that I think that I've thought about that might help is making sure that you provide different modes or different methods of outreach, such as doing a video that may be in multiple languages. But again, you got to make sure that you have that capacity also. Literature is now kind of like moving into the backseat because people are looking more for instant gratification. They want to see a video or a short infographic that could also be translated also, which is important. And then also looking at those that may have a hearing or visual or even mobility issues also. How do we include them and make sure that they're being aware of what's going on and how to participate as well. So there's a lot of unanswered questions or kind of a lot of sifting through the dark where we're trying to find out what is the best approach. So this is something that again is still building, and I think everyone's kind of struggling with it. It's something that hasn't been presented before. So
yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a number of different ways that people can be left out of a process, and so there are so many things to keep in mind as planners and people doing community engagement work are whether it's planning a meeting or making a presentation or whatever the case may be. There are a number of things to keep in mind. So one of the things that maybe we can talk about a bit tonight is what are some resources for planners, for people who are doing community engagement work, who are trying to reach certain communities, certain populations? Are there a handful of organizations or resources that you all have found to be particularly helpful? Because there's no need to start from scratch if somebody else already has some really useful materials to learn from, to build upon, to adapt. So that's something I'd love to hear about. In the meantime, Marion, you had something to share on this as well, I believe.
Yes. From the accessibility point of view, one of our major issues is that we want to design to code and to standard. Unfortunately, we have a complete disconnect between the code and the alignment with the demographic. So the code about accessibility is to push everything for people using a wheelchair device, which is great. They had a really great outcome with the CapCuts, gave that accessibility everywhere. However, we need to keep in mind that in the US, 26% of the people declare having some kind of functional limitation, and there's only 1.4% who actually need a wheelchair device. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the reality and what the code forces us to do, knowing that one of the major functional limitations is actually impairment on mobility, so just a serious difficulty walking or climbing stairs. And when you talk to them, what they really want is actually benches. So we also need to make sure that there's a direct connection between what the product we want to deliver and the end users. So that link with the demographic. And then there's another thing also is not to design in the vacuum. When I worked for public transit, well, it goes to the station, to another station or a bus stop, but we need to have access to those transit stops and station. So we need to have a holistic approach. We need to have the whole experience in mind, and we need to design facade to facade. So we have that inclusive, that holistic experience, so that we don't miss steps, because there's nothing worse than designing a beautiful, accessible station, but the access to the station to the hospital is not. So we need to have also, from a space point of view, a real understanding. So yeah, there was two things that I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Marion, that, you know, sometimes the solution is not actually such a great fit for what the problem is. And if you talk to the people who you're trying to serve and you find out from them, well, you know, what are the challenges or the barriers that you're encountering, and, you know, what ideas for solutions do you have? And you know, maybe here are 5 different ones that we have in mind, but, you know, do these speak to you, and would these, you know, make your life better? Would these improve your quality of life and your, you know, your ability to get from point A to point B? So that's a you know, really important point. And so and then this issue of connectedness, right? It's all well and good if the transit station itself, you know, is like super accessible, but if people can't really get there, then we have a problem, right? So making sure that we're enabling folks who are coming, you know, from a variety of situations with a variety of needs, in different modes to get to the places, these hubs, these, you know, transportation hubs that they need to access. That's, you know, another really crucial point. So I want to now ask about some examples that are, you know,
Erica,
yeah.
if I may, I think Nigel had his hand up.
Okay, yes.
Sorry about that.
Over to you.
Yeah. Like on the theme of potential partners, resources that we have access to, one of the things that we've made a lot of really good use of in Boston are designers and universities. We've done a lot of work with a professor at Emerson College, which is like a smaller liberal arts college here in town, called the at Emerson, the lab is called the Engagement Lab, and Eric and his team have done a lot of work around the notion of like how to make co-production productive. Like, how do you make that actually work? And because I think it's often a term that we hear batted about, you know, co-design and so on. But there is some it can be fraught if you are working with someone that doesn't really know how to do that, especially working with traditionally disadvantaged people. So one potential resource that we have access to in the greater Boston area are many different designers that have a lot of facility with co-design skills that can often be used to overhaul or invigorate planning processes.
Great. You know, we're always excited to hear about how higher ed, you know, can be part of the solution. So definitely great to hear about examples. Terrific. Are there any other comments on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. Okay.
I had a quick comment. Actually, one of our students from the City Planning and Urban Affairs was the Urban Mechanics Lab Fellow last year. So, and we really loved the work. It's fantastic.
And we love the fellows. Keep sending them.
Wonderful. So moving on to the next question, kind of pivoting from some of the challenges and the mistakes that are often made to some really stellar examples of where you have seen this work done well, where there was an inclusive process, and also how that process influenced the project that was ultimately developed, implemented, and maintained. Because of course, as Marion pointed out to me in our conversation the other day, we need to talk about maintenance. Maintenance is such a crucial part of things. And I know this well because I pay attention to, you know, cracks in the sidewalks, and, you know, Nigel's 311 is definitely something that, you know, many of us are familiar with and take advantage of to report issues to, you know, municipalities where we live. We're going to start off with Elijah on this one, talking about some stellar examples of inclusive transportation processes. Over to you, Elijah.
Yes, so it's kind of been mentioned before, like this whole pre-COVID and post-COVID. But I will say in the last 6 or 7 months, you know, as I staff the planning board and we hold our different public hearings and public meetings, the public engagement has definitely increased in terms of like just the amount of people that attend a meeting. You know, even like twice as much, sometimes 3 times as much. And I think, you know, while that it tends to lead to more work for myself, I think it's still a good thing to see that the public is being more engaged. It's definitely, you know, lend itself to different projects, different special permits and site plans that are being approved. There's definitely more of a public input. And, you know, that always brings, when you have more people at the table, it brings more perspectives, more ideas, and it really helps kind of move that process along to make it more of a, you know, a project that has different inputs. So, you know, it's still a balancing act between different stakeholders, you know, being the public versus, you know, the municipality or the developer. So, you know, you're always trying to kind of gauge and balance you know, everyone's concerns. But I will say that there have been projects over the last couple of months that an abundance of public comments have definitely made a difference. But I think Annabelle mentioned it previously. While I do see like the you know, the increase, you know, you have to also think about the communities that don't have that internet access or are, you know, have different you know, capabilities that don't necessarily lend itself to audio visual. And so just keeping that in mind.
Right, absolutely. So on the one hand, we have more attendance at meetings because it's online, you know, kind of reduces the, you know, transportation barriers that existed, but we have other challenges. I mean, a lot of Massachusetts actually still doesn't have you know, the kind of internet access that other parts of the state have, and that's been a long-term issue. So, you know, and then of course there are socioeconomic factors as well. So on top of geographic ones, so kind of some pros and some cons that we have right now for sure. Nigel, curious to hear your perspective on this.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm thinking about the role that technology plays. So in a city like Boston, the question of how technology is changing the built environment is on our minds. Obviously, we're not trying to build cities for technology, but rather we're trying to build, you know, technology should enhance the city living experience. But the question is often, how do you enable moments for the public to be able to be part of the design process, and in terms of like what kinds of devices should go into what particular spaces and to what end and who benefits and how do you check that? And so one of the things that we did actually with Eric Gordon, who I was just mentioning, was a project called Beta Blocks, which was a design process that we put together to explore how to firstly teach people how to interrogate the built environment. I think a lot of times we forget that the things that are in the built environment, people are making decisions about those things, right? Everything from curbs to sewers to streetlights. These are all decisions that people are being made traditionally, sometimes, without any public input. And so we're trying to look at, increasingly, as you look at cities like Toronto, and a lot of these technology companies are coming in and just putting devices in different places. And so we're trying to create a process by which the community can interrogate the devices that are there, and then decide on the kinds of things that they would like to see in their communities, and to help inform local government and other anchor institutions about the kinds of changes that they would like to see there, whether it's electric scooters or what have you. So the Beta Blocks project, in addition to teaching the skills of interrogating the built environment, why does the curb need to be there? Why does what impact does the rumble patch have on how people in chairs, their ability to get up and down the curb cut? But also to thinking about sensors and who gets to decide which kinds of sensors go in which places. So Beta Blocks was a process, an experimental process, a prototype process that we ran in a few different neighborhoods around the city, in which the community, it was sort of a facilitated dialogue between us, the people that were running the workshops, and the community around the kinds of decisions that they would like to make about the future of, it was sort of like an on the ground futuring workshop for neighborhoods. And we were able to get young people involved by enabling them to go on taking people on tours around the neighborhood, so that they can sort of remind themselves that, what's there and what could be there, and so on. So we were able to get young people involved, and people for whom English is not a first language involved, because they may not know what that thing is called, but they can certainly point to a thing that's on their street light, and they obviously, folks have questions. And so we were able to bring together a few different issues to rethink the way the built environment is being built and is rolling out in Boston.
Thanks. Whereabouts might people experience that, Nigel?
So at this point, because that was an experimental project, we packed up all of our stuff. We ran this in a few different neighborhoods in the city. If you're interested in more, you can look online, or you can call me up. I'm at the mayor's office, or you can look at our website, Boston/New Urban Mechanics, and we're happy to talk about this. And because we're actively trying to think through what does the next version of this methodology look like in Boston.
Great, that sounds exciting. All right, so Marion, would you like to chime in?
Yes, I'd love to talk about the Green Line transformation. So it's a project in the making. So it may look really bright, and we'll see if there's a hurdle along the way, but it has started, it has already 2 years, and the Green Line transformation is one project with a long-term goal, a transformational vision, where we would change the legacy trolley system with new vehicle and new stations. So this is really rare to be noticed. Usually you change one or the other, but not the two at the same time. And that's really the beauty of that project. So we would have a level boarding, high capacity Green Line in a handful of years. So what is why I believe it's an inclusive process and has some really great attribute to it. It's because first they have built a real understanding of the current issues with an extensive user expert review. So what is a user expert review is people with some functional limitation experiencing the service and testing what are the issues when they experiment with the environment. So we see how they behave in the environment to understand what are the issues we need to fix. And then because of all that knowledge that we have gained from this review, we have built design criteria, and we have also built a committed design team where we had people understanding really well accessibility issues at the core of that team. Then, as I've mentioned, we never design within a vacuum. There's a close collaboration with the City of Boston to work and improve the access pass and the emergency egress. When we have new concepts, we would have dedicated outreach. So the Green Line transformation program, should I say, have built a database of people with functional limitation, with different background, living in the catchment area to test new concepts. So we want to try this. What do you think? So little item, and yes, we will do that remotely, and so we'll see how it goes with 3D technology. For people with vision impairment, with people with hearing impairment. So we'll see how that works. But for the moment, we have also witnessed an increase of attendance for those forums. And so focused user expert, and then confirmed by public engagement.
Nice, great. So Marion, I'm noticing a theme here tonight, definitely between you and Nigel, which is around testing, right? Experimenting, gaining data, data points, input from people, hearing their ideas, and then, kind of taking that and saying, okay, how are we going to change things? Maybe we're going to expand this. So this, kind of design thinking approach is definitely a common theme here. We're running just slightly behind, so we have kind of 2 predetermined questions next, and then we're going to have Julia facilitate some questions that have come in from our attendees. So I want to pivot now to talking about climate change and public health. So starting off with Elijah on this one, how do climate change and public health fit into your work? And when we think about climate change, both in terms of reducing emissions, as well as adapting to the impacts of climate change, whether that's heat or other impacts, just kind of throw one resource out there that some folks may have heard of. The Cool Cities network supports cities' efforts to reduce the impact of the urban heat island effect, working in partnership with the Global Cool Cities Alliance. But there are a number of examples of important work that's happening all over Massachusetts, all over the US, and abroad as well. So Elijah, I'll ask you to kick this one off, and then we'll head over to Jimmy to get his take as well.
All right, so give a quick snapshot. I think I can speak. I've managed a couple different projects in Bridgewater as it relates to climate change and energy reduction. I think the first project I started was looking at the town's fleet of vehicles, and we were able to add a couple hybrid vehicles to the fleet. I was able to get some charging stations installed on the town hall's campus that helped the hybrid vehicles, as well as those in the public that just needed to charge their cars. I think that's one example of trying to reduce the carbon footprint and just leading to a cleaner and greener future. Another project that I recently wrapped up was retrofitting the town's street lights to LEDs. So this project, there's like over 1,000 lights in the city that were running on older halogen lamps. And so this project changed them to LEDs. And it was a couple different funding sources, thankfully through the state, the DOER office, MAPC was a part of that as well. And so those groups, National Grid as well, so they kind of helped change those lights to LEDs. You know, it helped reduce the energy usage. It helped, you know, brighten up the streets for just better safety in terms of pedestrians and bikers and whatnot. And then it also, you know, saved a little money. That's always a nice thing. But really, yeah, the energy reduction was one of the parts that I really was proud of in reducing that carbon footprint, especially as we see a lot of the issues that are very apparent as it relates to climate change.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and also Boston University is working on expanding its electric vehicle charging stations. So lots of work going on in that realm these days, which is good to see. So Jimmy, over to you. Thoughts on how climate change and public health fit into your work?
A great question. So definitely, again, planning is very interdisciplinary. So even from the beginning of my planning career, working with, again, Mass Bike and the City of Springfield in Pioneer Valley Planning Commission as a healthy design coordinator, we were looking at how do we look at the built environment, how do we improve the built environment, and also look at active transportation. So the priority there was basically improve access to cycling and inform and encourage people to cycle, so make sure that the roads are safe, but also looking at the climate change impact. So with more, as you know, as everyone knows, with more bicycles on the road, then you're able to, and less cars on the road, then you're able to reduce emission. City of Springfield, similar to Brockton, is a gateway city with high obesity rates, high asthma rates as well, and working with in partnership with the medical field of the health agencies that was there, such as Bay State Health, Mercy Hospital, and the local clinics as well. We're able to look at how can you have someone increase their activity or increase their exercise, and also look at how they could save dollars or how they could make sure that, you know, their pockets aren't being impacted. So in the city of Springfield, any patient that went into the hospital, the doctor, instead of prescribing medicine, would be able to prescribe, say, 3 hours on for a bike share program that the Pioneer Valley Riverfront Club was hosting. So they had bikes, a fleet of bikes. You would bring in the slip, you'd have 30 minutes, an hour, and you would be able to go along the Connecticut River Walk. So again, having this interdisciplinary approach where you look at the overlap and how can you basically take down two birds with one stone. Of course, animal cruelty is something we're against. So, but again, with that said, is like, how can you basically take care of these issues, whether it be cost effective, but also help impact the environment that we have, and how to help improve that environment also. So that's one way that we see it there. In the planning field here at the Planning Council, we have a lot of coastal communities also. So looking at how does whether it be seawater rising, how does that impact our communities and what the long-term effects of that are, and how do we basically reduce the impacts for these communities also. And again, it's looking at not just looking at biking and walking, but making sure that there's access to transportation, public transportation. There isn't really a lot of buses in the suburban and rural communities. So looking at bike share programs, ride share programs, but having to kind of tailor changes to that because of COVID-19. So again, what do these changes look like, and how do you adapt to climate change also?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great summary. So we have COVID and the need to distance, and a bunch of people being cooped up and not getting the level of physical activity that maybe we once did. And so how do we create safe ways for people to get physical activity when maybe now, a lot of folks working from home, maybe not walking or biking as much as they were before, not going to the gym, what have you. So how can transportation or recreational opportunities help, meet those needs from a health standpoint? And then this issue of, in terms of climate change, reducing emissions through sustainable transportation modes. What can planners be doing? What can communities be doing to enable active transportation and sustainable transportation? So thanks for your perspective on that through some different roles that you've had, Jimmy. We're going to now turn to COVID and Black Lives Matter. Two major themes of 2020, of course, that have, rightfully gained, so much attention and require a lot of work. So this will be the last question that I ask. And I will say that we have received so many questions from our attendees. And they have stuck with us. We still have 65 plus people with us, and we may need to do a follow-up event where we dig into some of these details, because we just have so many questions and we will not be able to get to them all tonight. So apologies in advance if we don't get to your question, but we do have just so many excellent questions. So over to Nigel to start this one off, and then we'll hear from Elijah. Tell us a little bit about how the COVID-19 pandemic and or the Black Lives Matter movement has shaped your views and your practices toward transportation planning and being more inclusive. And we'll start with Nigel on that.
Well, I will say that both COVID-19 and the racial reckoning that this country is going through are many things, but one of those is that they're a crisis in government, right? What government does, the way that it delivers service. And so certainly when COVID-19 became a thing early in the year, we very quickly had to rethink that we do the things that we do. City Hall has been largely closed for months. And so how do we still deliver a high quality of service to the residents of Boston when we're not actually there? And so we very quickly sort of got everyone out of the building and got everyone home and sort of started thinking about how do we retool the services so they can be delivered directly by people being remote. When the racial uprising started across this country, again, I think there was a very strong sense that, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here, but one of those must be that we have to rethink government. There's this moment where we have to rethink government and like how it does it and what it does and how it goes about delivering service. And so, fortunately, the mayor had exactly the same reaction, where he wanted to treat this as a top level issue. And so he asked a local luminary, Dr. Carolyn Crockett, who's a history of the civil rights struggle in America and certainly in Boston. She's from Boston. But he asked Carolyn Crockett to lead this effort to rethink government, Boston government, the way that we do things. And so she's been on the ground since about the middle of the summer. And my team, the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, very quickly realized that this effort has to be top of mind for everything that we're doing. And so that we are certainly trying to rethink what does innovation look like in the era of trying to make City Hall anti-racist. How do we do that even in principle? And so certainly there's a lot of looking through all the things that government does, that we do it in Boston City Hall, but also thinking about how do we redesign the way that decisions are made and the way that that we include people in making those decisions. And so certainly our team has been looking at everything that we do, as in terms of kind of trying to pivot to an actively anti-racist direction. And so a lot of that has been for us, looking to our traditional partners or the kinds of groups that we've traditionally looked to rethink how that even works. And so we're looking at the way that we engage with universities and the kinds of conversations that we're having, and looking at the geographies that we're active, and the kinds of things that we deliver, and really kind of scrutinizing, are these things adding value? So there's a lot of things happening. I mean, these certainly aren't the only two efforts, but in Boston, it's really the hiring of Dr. Crockett as our chief of racial equity, and then everyone is sort of doing their best to start pushing in the right direction to make Boston City Hall anti-racist.
Thank you. Over to you, Elijah.
Yes, so yeah, I'd have to agree with Nigel on just looking at how the public sector kind of addresses these racial tensions, as well as just practicing the standards of social distancing and whatnot during COVID-19. This pandemic. I'll say, I guess, as it relates to the pandemic, it's definitely been a kind of learn as you go. Everyone's kind of doing that learn as you go kind of thing, and how we still provide the services to the town of Bridgewater, making sure that we're able to have these virtual sessions. Able to, make sure the right staff are, physically in a building, just to make sure that certain things are, kept running. And I guess, on a macro level, as it relates to Black Lives Matter, since this movement kind of reignited over the summer, I think, one of the questions was, what about defunding the police? And so that's definitely been a question of, some people it's considered abolition, others it's also just shining a light on what are the root causes of some of these issues that are occurring. Looking at where the public money goes to, taxpayer dollars, does it necessarily go to, specifically in one house, or should it be spread across so that there's more social services provided? And honestly, it's looking at trying to be proactive as opposed, I feel like in this society, we're very reactive. If there's a problem that happens, it's just, we wait till it boils over to address it. But, in this time, I think it's definitely an idea of looking at the root causes, analyzing them, and looking at ways to address them.
Absolutely. Thank you for your perspective, Elijah.
I want to add something if I could.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I like the idea. I mean, in terms of COVID-19 shaping the work that we're doing at Livable Street, I think it has amplified in terms of advocacy and policy. It actually, people are specifically decision makers and elected officials are listening differently. And I think this is the time to really take advantage of the window that we have in terms of pushing change. We saw it specifically in helping businesses, right? Like restaurant, right? Like municipalities were able to adjust super quickly and change regulations around how, outdoor business sittings, so there is an opportunity, and I think it's a very short window to really challenge some sort of the status quo around these changes and policy and implementation. So we have seen at our organization that's as an opportunity, specifically now. Again, elected officials are just, and government in general is just listening differently. And I think there's an opportunity in our field for that, specifically to intervene to some sort of this different strategy and how do we make the street welcoming, and also businesses and housing and transportation and climate change. So again, that's I just want to mention that we have a very unique opportunity now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really illuminating to see how the use of spaces has been changing based on things like COVID and what does that mean for our needs? Whether we're an individual looking to, get outside, get some exercise, interact with people in a safe way, or we're a business hoping to stay in business, or a municipality looking to, take care of our responsibilities, or, a university, of course, COVID has been a challenge. So it's this window of opportunity, as Annabelle said, to really, look at our use of space and what potential changes could be made. And maybe some of the changes that have been made on a temporary basis will actually be made permanent or will be expanded in some way. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that. So, as I said, we have lots of audience questions. Julia is going to have the hard job of determining which questions we fit in our last few minutes here. Julia Mintz is a graduate student in the Metropolitan College pursuing her master's in city planning and applied sustainability. And both BU Sustainability and City Planning and Urban Affairs are fortunate to have her work in our offices. So what better way to wrap up our questions than with Julia. So we're going to kind of just go with 2 panelists per question so that we can get through as many questions as possible. And we're going to go for about another 10 minutes or so and wrap up just after 7:50. So over to Julia.
Thank you very much, Erica. And we do have a lot of really incredible questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So the first question that I want to ask from any of the panelists who want to jump in on this first, what specific resources might you recommend to support inclusive planning? And do we have anybody that wants to get us started?
I think important resource would be nonprofit organizations in your community. It's always best to go to where people are. And if you have an organization that has a mailing list or has a listserv, they can disseminate the information. But also making sure that once that information is received, that it's accessible and it's easily accessible for someone that may not understand or may have English language proficiency, or also, again, ADA issues as well too. So making sure that everyone is able to access whatever link or portal access point for community members. Also, MassDOT has a program called Engage Tool. You can Google that, just put MassDOT Engage Tool, and you're able to kind of find out on that platform. You're able to find out who or what organizations are in your community and how to get in touch with them. It could be a contact information or email along with that contact information also.
I also want to share, I just put the link on the Milken Institute, which also has different trainings and resources around planning. And they do, many trainings on different topics, specifically around equity, and they're awesome. So check it out. I think they have a lot of resources within the website. You can look around for them.
Next question that I want to get to is, how do aesthetics interplay with practicality in the planning world, and how does it tend to impact a community's trust in process and projects? So maybe Elijah, would you like to answer this question?
Sorry there, could you repeat that for me?
Of course.
Sorry.
So how do aesthetics interplay with practicality in the planning world? And how do aesthetics tend to impact a community's trust in the process and in planning projects?
Well, I guess aesthetics as a physical, like, you know, how something looks, you know, you have to be able to, you know, so an applicant comes to a planning board meeting and they make their presentation on a project. You know, you have to kind of keep in mind, you know, what community you're working in or what community you're proposing a project in, and does it, you know, kind of, you know, work with that community as it relates to building size, location. You know, sometimes developers might be working in, you know, a contentious area where, you know, there's either environmental concerns or there's a historical, you know, historical significance. So you have to, and you know, from the, you know, the public municipality side, you have to be able to really balance that, that fine line of what, you know, is allowed for development versus what is protecting the, you know, the public good. And so it, honestly, it's a balancing act. You have to be able to see what can be implemented versus what looks good on paper.
Thank you. And would anybody else like to address this one specifically? Maybe Annabelle?
Yeah, I'm wondering, and this is some of the work that Erica and myself had done around placemaking. I feel like for community planning, placemaking is such a great tool because you can plan and also do something at the same time. One of the things that we did in that work, and we did it also in New Bedford, but in New York City, was to include arts and culture in the planning process, and for people to develop murals of like the NACHA buildings, you know, footprint, and that actually help a lot in terms of like building trust in the process. Like people really were really skeptical about the New York City Housing Authority. Like, you all playing me, you're all gonna destroy our housing and build new housing for the newcomers. So it's like that whole like process of seeing along the way and seeing progress really helped. And I love that model of like, you know, planning and doing things along the way so people can see progress, or like at least have hope something like change is coming, right? So I would say like placemaking strategy usually a good way to integrate in the process.
Thank you. So our next audience question that I would like to address, how have local zoning, NIMBYism, and other factors either supported or served as a hindrance to transit-oriented development? Would anyone like to get us started on this one?
I could start on that one. So it's very complex. I will say that Massachusetts has a unique way, and how do we make decisions? Zoning laws have at the state level haven't been updated since the 70s, early 70s. I think it was 1969. And that actually have caused for 351 cities and towns. We left those cities and towns with a decision to decide on zoning laws locally, right? So we have 351 cities and towns making these decisions on their own, because we don't have some sort of override at the state level. And that is complex. I feel like it's really depend on like the cities and town, and now this whole movement around like really pushing back on development has really added a new layer to the whole problem, right? Like the housing crisis that we haven't been able to address. And I think it has to do a little bit of some sort of specifically the NIMBYs movement in suburban community has a lot to do with that, connected with the community engagement piece that I talked at the beginning, like how do we make sure we bring different voices, the renter, to the conversation, right? A lot of I think there's actually a study from your from BU who came out last year, the year before, about how many of the the strong voices in public meeting, right, which is like homeowners and NIMBYs, right, like when it comes to housing and transportation, some of these different things, you don't have a perspective at the table about like making those interconnections between the need. And so renters is lacking in terms of like the participation in those meetings, specifically in suburban communities. So and that also speak to the TOD. I think like it's different from cities to town, because again, every city and town is on their own, so that we don't have like some sort of regional frame around how this decision should be made. So that's a problem, and I think that's one of the reasons why this housing choice, the governor bill, is such as we all see as some sort of like a change in the space, because it's gonna address some of those like treasurers decision making processes. So it's a complex. I think there's like a political will situation, like a issue there, but also how do we build the structure of supporters on the ground?
I guess I'll just have to co-sign with everything that Annabelle said. Definitely agree with her. I think to add to that, I guess I would say, as a planner, it's you're in a very pivotal role. It's when I was at Tufts, they called it being a change agent. In many ways, you're like a power broker. You're kind of really working with all these different stakeholders, and at the end of the day, you're trying to help come to some type of middle lane, and it's not always going to be the side of the public, or it's not always going to be necessarily what the developer wants. And so it's really just trying to figure out how you can effectively engage with all sides, and trying to bring your own, professionalism to it.
Thank you. And Erica, do you think we have time to squeeze in one or two more questions, or?
Yes, I wish we could do an audience vote, although that might be a little complicated. Maybe next time. Why don't you see if you can pick one of these or consolidate them a little bit more, and we'll wrap up with one or two more questions.
Sure. Well, how about, so for any of our panelists, what are some cities that present particularly inspirational examples in your work or in any of the topics that we've discussed previously?
I guess I'll just say that for myself, when I was, doing my graduate work at Tufts, I really looked at the city of Newark, New Jersey, and then Jackson, Mississippi. I think it's, they have really visionary mayors. And I think when you have a visionary mayor or a visionary, public leader, it definitely lends itself to, different ways that you can kind of create more of a public process, trying to give more voice to, your population. And so I guess those are two that I can think of.
When I think of interesting cities that are doing fascinating work in the realm of civic engagement and creative built environment, I often think about Amsterdam, both the city of Amsterdam, the local government, as well as some of their community and arts organizations are doing some really amazing things. It is a very different city than most American cities, but it's sort of a high bar when you think about pulling out all the stops on creative built environment projects.
Thank you. And perhaps to finish us off, again, for whoever wants to jump in on this question, what kinds of flood resiliency efforts have you been involved in? And would you be able to give us a little bit of background information? You have an example that you'd like to share?
I could speak a little bit about it. We worked on a municipal mitigation prevention program where communities kind of highlighted what the issues are. Some of the coastline communities, of course, addressed seawater rise, flooding as an issue. So identifying, what those issues are and kind of looking at how you can find resources to help alleviate those issues. Whether it be seawalls and finding the funding for it. Also, MassDOT does do some funding for bridge repairs and culverts as well. And we've been able to help align some of the projects with those issues as well too, and help communities identify those projects themselves as well. So they'd be able to take the initiative on engaging or pursuing funding opportunities to help with those issues as well.
Thank you. And do any of our other panelists have any specific examples that they might like to share with us? And if not, I can also pass it back to Erica. We have a lot of really great audience questions and unfortunately not enough time to get to all of them, but thank you for submitting your questions, and please feel free to send them in to us if you have any remaining questions before the end of the event.
Thank you, Julia. Great job. So thank you so much to our attendees for your interest in the topic this evening. We do want to encourage you to be in touch with the organizers and the panelists tonight so that we can keep the conversation going, keep sharing information and inspiration, and be supportive to each other on the various initiatives that we're involved in. And a big thank you to our panelists for their time this evening and for being in communication over the past few weeks as we prepared for tonight's event. We're really fortunate to be in conversation with you and learn from your experiences. So we want to thank you so much for your time and the important work that you're doing. And thank you to City Planning and Urban Affairs for providing us with this platform tonight. We encourage you to connect with both City Planning and Urban Affairs, as well as BU Sustainability on social media, and let us know what you're interested in so it can help inform future events. Madhu, I'd like to turn it over to you to close us out.
Sure. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and for the panelists for really bringing the most insightful information from the ground right to this forum. And I think all of us are leaving here with a lot more things learned than we knew before, and certainly a lot more questions. And I hope most of all, we feel even more committed to making our environments really carbon free, either through transportation or otherwise. So I just wanted to say we have a very short survey. It's a one question, I think 2 question survey. We would love it if you could fill it out. And after this, we will take a 10-minute break, and we will be right back with the screening of the movie, Growing Cities.